Welcome to this week's podcast. Today we'll be discussing how to give advice, or maybe how not to, and the issues with giving advice. I think we'll just go straight into it, and I'll explain how this idea came into be. So I was sitting across from Ruan, and he was probably giving a voice note to someone. He was giving advice to them. And this is not an uncommon occurrence. There are 20-minute voice notes flying back and forth with what sounds to me like advice. And it's something I found very interesting about you, because it's something that I very rarely do. And whether that comes from a fear of giving advice or an inner caution of giving advice, I don't know. But it is something that I noticed it was a big contrast. And so I asked you, well, how are you so comfortable giving people advice? And how are you so quick to come up with answers to their questions? And the reason I asked is because my inner struggle is that when I ask other people for advice, I realize how impractical my question is because of the impossibility to really translate all the information available to me to them as well. So I can't paint the same picture. I find it so difficult to then listen to what they say and really take it to heart when they know so little about my situation. And I almost feel bad then to ask for advice because of that. And so when someone asks me for advice, I'm like scrambling in my head because I ask so many questions and I'm like, oh, but what about this? What about this? And I feel like I make them feel worse at the end of the day rather than giving them good advice. So this is why we wanted to discuss this. We wanted to discuss, well, how do you give advice? Should you give advice? What are the dangers of giving advice? So where shall we start?
Okay, so you'll see I took out a little notebook here.
I did. I feel like now this is a psychology class. I don't know what's happening now.
First thing is to listen to what they're saying and take notes on what is important.
Okay.
Practical example. No, actually, this is actually quite ironic. I just thought about this the other day and I was like, a lot of the times you give quite an extensive answer and you get very in-depth in various things in the same answer. And then at the end, I only answer one of the things you maybe mentioned that I found. Okay, let's talk about this. And then we go off into the next thing and the next thing. And I couldn't really address all the points I wanted to say. So I thought I'm actually going to start practicing making notes while listening to you speak on a podcast. So here's the introduction thereof. But yeah, that was a good way to introduce it. So how do you approach giving advice? So I want to break this up into, firstly, when someone asks you for advice, and then secondly, when someone doesn't ask you for advice. So the way, thank you for the compliment. The way I approach or feel like I sometimes very quickly give advice, I must admit that it is not me. Or it is not, many of the times I say stuff and I'm like, that was very good advice. Well done, Ruan. But that wasn't my own thought of I'm just so wise thing. As many of the times I believe wholeheartedly that was a word of wisdom, that the Lord was speaking through me and allowed me to perceive things in certain ways. But I can't really make a podcast about how to give advice through the Holy Spirit because, it's not how, you can't tell someone how to do that. So taking a step away from that, what do I practically do in full control? So the first thing is I ask a lot of questions because a lot of it, why? A lot of the times the person tells you their perspective and I try to get the objective perspective of the situation. So I try to not get pulled into the thing that they already pulled in, which is their own way of looking at things. And the reason they need advice is many of the times because out of their perspective, they can't see all of the things. So I try to ask questions and I try to get a better perspective on the situation and realize, okay, this is where they are and this is how they see things. But they might be looking at this differently, or maybe they find themselves unable to see certain things because they feel emotionally inclined. So I try to understand the exact situation of what they're going through or what's going through their mind, and then also to identify what they might be missing, and I ask questions on that. And it's very hard without an example, because each case has its unique questions that you have to ask. But I think realizing the person seeking advice often seeks it because they cannot see a way out, or they cannot see the best way to act. And most likely that's because they're stuck in the situation. So if they just tell you their view, and you're going to be like, I think you should do this, and they go like, that's exactly what I think, then you must maybe reconsider, because you might just be using only the information that they've given you, which is the exact information they're using to make their own decisions. And they're asking your advice because you have an outside perspective, or you might have a different way of thinking about things. So that's the first way I approach things. Anything on that?
So that's just an exploration of a deep exploration. Instead of jump into advice, you ask a lot of questions.
Yes.
What you were trying to say there. Okay, that's fine. There is issues I have with that, but I want to hear all the ways that. But is that your first step?
That's the first thing I do. I just try to get perspective.
Yes.
On
okay,
what's
now
going
you
on.
have perspective, or you feel like you do.
Okay. Then I will point out their flaws in thinking, or their mistakes in what they can't see. And this is a way I would disagree with myself almost, because when you pointed out to me that I end up giving a lot of advice, and the way I approach giving advice, you said to me, the way I do it is I tell the person what to do. And I was like, oh, that's so terrible. That's such a dangerous thing. And I agree that it's a dangerous thing, but I find myself recurringly doing it.
Oh, so wait, that was just an observation, but do you actually feel like that?
So when you
that
pointed
is
it
your
out,
style?
when you pointed it out, I was like, wow, that is actually something I do very often, especially with my sister. Don't take this personally. I won't say which one, but they'll know. So with my sister, she acts in a very unpredictable way, and it makes it very difficult to look at things the same way that she's looking at it.
Okay.
So what I try to do is I try to understand the situation, in objective sense, and then I try to give her that objectivity. So I point out where they are, looking into stuff that don't really matter, but obviously it feels to them like it really matters. And then I'll try to give them perspective. Hey, listen, this is not really an important thing, or something that does matter, and say, listen, this is what you're doing, and this is not correct because X, Y, Z. And specifically with my sister, I would then go on and say, if I were you, I would rather this. And then I'll tell her how I would approach the situation. But that is a highly dangerous thing, and I really much want to stop doing that, because it touches on the manipulation that we've said, where it takes away control. It's not a manipulative thing because you're telling them what to do and they get to choose if they want to do it or not. But it's still, if they think you are someone of authority or someone of greater wisdom, they'll be like, okay, no, I'm going to trust him more than I trust myself because I always make mistakes. Then they do what you said, and if they succeed, it's your success, and if they fail, it's their consequence. So I want to move away from that, especially with my sister as well, because now so many times me and my family have given her advice, but there's no room for growth in that individual for making their own mistakes. And if you do that with anyone for the whole life, give them advice, they'll never learn to really make their own choices. And I get some people are a little less assertive and stuff like that with their opinions and stuff, so it's difficult for them to make choices. But I think it's better to steer away from that. But anyway, I find myself doing that a lot. Okay. I tell the person, listen, this is what I would do in your situation, but I would give them perspective of why. I would do this because of this. I would do this because of that.
So this is a way of thinking.
Yes, so that I can enlighten them. I would give them perspective of my way of thinking and why I think this. And I am cautionary with who I do this to, but most of the time when I do this very comfortably, I know it's a person who's not going to be like, okay, I'm just going to follow your advice. I most often only do that to a person who I know is going to take that and be like, I see your way of thinking. I might agree with this, but I'll disagree with this. And that's a very good way of thinking, because then they'll tell me why they disagree. And then they might add something that I didn't know, or they'll say, okay, but you're saying this, and okay, it makes sense. And then they'll get perspective on their emotional side. So that's my way of approaching it.
You've said you ask a lot of questions, you point out flaws, and then you essentially say, I would do this, but then give the reasoning behind it.
Yes.
So the reasoning behind it, you can see that is different to what most people do, because what you're trying to say there is, well, it's very easy to say, I would do this, and very much parent mentality, not tell them why, because either you're lazy and there's a whole host of reasons why, or like, don't worry, you'll understand. So I understand why you're doing that, and then your intention behind it, you're trying to teach them how to think, so that when they're in a similar situation, they can try and adopt the same way of thinking.
Yeah.
So you're teaching them a system. Okay, you've told me now how you give advice. How do you think other people are giving advice?
Well,
and how is it different from yours?
I've never thought about how other people give advice and if my method is correct. Maybe because I've, from a young age, not for like that young, but like from high school, found myself giving a lot of advice to people, and many of the times I would get positive feedback like, oh, that's such good advice, Ruan, you give such good advice, Ruan, that was so helpful, it helped me this and this and this. And because of the positive feedback, I never really questioned the advice I was giving.
So you're saying you're a natural?
No, I'm blessed. No, so I've really never given this thought, but I would say if someone gives advice and saying, no, you should do this with no reason, I guess you get people that give advice like that, which is I would steer away from. Then there's agreeable persons or people, and that is a very dangerous kind of person, because it's someone that has convinced themselves, if I can make you feel better about your choice, you're most likely making the right choice, which is so terrible.
Why?
Because just because you feel good about your choice doesn't make it a good or a right choice. Ask Hitler. You see what I'm saying? You can, yeah, sorry, I like to use him as an example for a lot of things, because it's an extreme example that people agree upon as he acted wrong. You know, a lot of other examples, people are like, okay, but maybe in this way it was right. But with Hitler, it's like, wrong. Okay, but yeah, so if an agreeable person comes to you and they're like, oh, what's happening? And you tell them how you feel and what the story is and the situation is, they're like, but what do you want to do? Oh, honey, I back you all the way. You've got this. Don't even worry about them. You are the one who's important. They're all about that emotional, want to make you feel better about your choice. And they're not giving you any valuable advice to give you perspective. Because without perspective, you're going to make the same blind choice almost. So I guess you get people like that as well. Okay. If I quickly think about it. How do you give advice, Jordan?
Before we get to me.
All right.
So my method has also really been to ask a lot of questions. Step one, which you said is your step one. But the thing I always worry about is, I'll make an analogy for this. You think that when you ask a lot of questions, you're taking yourself from seeing 20% of the picture, maybe to 70 or 80% of the picture, because you've asked a whole lot more questions. But my fear is almost, what if I've just taken myself from 5% to 10%? And arguably, I'm giving advice on an equal amount of uninformed information. So that's the first thing. How do you know also that the picture that the person is painting is not in a certain direction? You really have to trash in, trash out. You have to trust that this person is being honest with you, and not in the sense that they are a dishonest person, but if they're not being honest with themselves, then they will paint a completely erroneous picture to you. And this is often, you find this with partners, where the wife goes home and she's a horrible person at work. She goes home and she explains the situation to her husband, which is a very practical person, and he'll agree with her because of the way that she describes the issue. You leave out key aspects, things that she did. So you can sometimes, how do you pick that up? You need to be able to pick that up if you genuinely care about the person when they are being impractical. Because usually when you go to someone for advice, I would say most people aren't looking for advice. They're looking for affirmation. And you need to be able to identify this as well. So I almost want to say there's a step before you give advice, and it's to identify, does a person actually want advice?
But we're talking about people who's asking you for advice.
Yes, but that's the point.
Oh,
They're saying they want advice, but is that really what they want?
that's very true.
So
You get those.
That's like step one, identify that. And then step two is the issue that they express, I think, is often not the issue that is actually the problem. If you can, and this really comes from this logic, if you can accurately describe a problem, you can usually solve it very easily. So the fact that they come into you and they're asking this question probably means it's a poorly formulated question. And it's a really bad articulation of the actual situation that they're in. And so this makes the questions very difficult because your questions often come from their initial description, or you follow on from that. You forget to question the initial, I want to say that initial assumption that they've delivered to you. I went to work and my boss just looked at me funny. I don't know. You forget to interrogate the initial picture and to also question their reality. You sure you saw that? I mean, that can be seen as gaslighting now, but the point there being those base initial assumptions that everything, now you're having a whole conversation, but the fundamental is wrong. So I'd say that's also a very important step with advice. But after that is the part where I tap out. Now, I'm very good at investigating, asking questions, trying to sift out what's wrong and what's not. But the point where you then have to say, if I was you, I would do this. I don't know why, but I'm so cautious to do that. And the reason is, when you tell the person those words, if I was you, this is what I would do, they imagine you being in that situation with all the same feelings, same ideas, same emotions, same information, and they believe that you, which is this person that they believe to have make good decisions, will do what you said you'll do. And you have no idea what that actually means.
But you're making the assumption that they picture you in that situation with the full knowledge that they have. I see it as they picture you in that situation with only the information that they've provided you. And I've given people advice, and then they would say, no, but you'd only do that because you didn't know this and this, and then they'll add up stuff as to why they wouldn't have done that. So they don't always assume that you know everything that they know.
Well, that's only if they feel slightly misunderstood. But I think if you genuinely make them feel understood, then they believe that you understand the whole situation. So, and this is something that comes from me as well. The feeling is there, but my idea, I know it's different. So if you say, if I was you, I would do that, I know that you're doing that based on limited information, but I recognize the feeling inside myself that takes what you said and says, if he knows everything that you know, and this is what he'd do, and I recognize that influence inside myself because of the type of person that I know that you are, and that has a significant impact on me, even though I know. So that's also it was a tough thing to deal with, but yeah, nonetheless, that was my biggest issue with if I were you. I don't know if we're supposed to use a different linguistic term that's not as powerful, but it's a very dangerous thing to say, I think.
I think saying if I were you is less powerful than saying I think you should.
Yeah. Why?
Because saying I think you should puts them in a this is what you should do commandment situation. But if I say this is what I would do if I were you, it's not as telling you that you should be doing this. It's more, I would probably make this decision, but you still get to choose your own choice for how to handle whatever the advice is about. So it's less, directly, assertively saying what you should do. It's a bit separated.
I hear you, but I think it actually depends on your personality type, what you value more in people, in terms of if you want people to like who you are, then you want to be like them. And then you might find the other more of a powerful statement. So this just kind of throws a bit of the baby out with the bathwater because, I've said the impact of your statement depends on the person you're talking to.
Yeah, which it very much does.
Yeah.
I find myself adjusting the way I give advice a lot to whoever's the one asking me for the advice. Some people, they have a softer nature. So pointing out their flaws, you have to do it in a very particular way so that they don't feel you're attacking them. You're just here to point out a mistake. So that it is very per person who's giving you advice. So that's definitely, like you said, knowing if they actually want the advice and knowing if they're a person who actually can take the advice. It's very fundamental to how you approach giving them advice.
So it's very personal.
It is very personal.
Okay. I think that explores how both of us think the right way to go about advice is. But what is this based on? That's the problem.
My feedback. That's what all I've based it on.
Well, my feedback has not been very good, so maybe don't listen to me.
So remember when I gave you advice when you were in the situation with a...
Yes.
Should I not mention it?
Yes. But I know what you're talking about.
Okay,
it was a tough life decision. It was a fork in the road. It would have completely, I would say, changed my life path.
Yeah. And I found myself very clearly saying to you, if I were you, I would have done this. Mm. How did that impact you? It
was what I said earlier. I knew what you were saying there, and I understood in my mind that you were doing this based on the information that you had at hand. But it definitely, my feelings was like second guessing my own decision. And it's because of the person I know you to be and the reason that you gave behind it. So it caused me to deeply introspect about the priority that you laid on the table and whether I am doing that same thing or if I wasn't, why I'm not doing that.
Did you at any time feel like I was telling you what to do? And if I did, how would that have changed?
No, but I recognize that for my personality type, I care less about if someone gives me a direct command. Like that doesn't influence me as much as someone saying, I'd like you if you did this. That influences me more, and that's just, maybe I have some trauma. I don't know. But yes.
All right, that makes sense.
Okay. How does advice change? Now, we've talked about consensual advice, right? So if someone comes to you and says, can you give me advice? Well, I'm dealing with this issue. What do you think?
Yeah.
But there are certain situations where you feel compelled to give advice even though it is not asked from you. So
yeah.
Say non-consensual advice.
You feel like you have to go point out their flaws.
Right. So what is the dynamic change there?
Okay. So I recently gave my sister advice on how to give someone that non-consensual advice, that unasked advice. And the way she approached it, I thought was very dangerous, because the thing we should remember when you ask advice, you're making yourself vulnerable to that person, giving a sense of you're making yourself so vulnerable that you can allow them to manipulate you almost, because you've now opened yourself up to them with a genuine trust.
Yeah.
So if you go to someone asking for advice, you are vulnerable and open to that advice. But if you go to someone and give them advice when they didn't ask for it, they never opened up the door, they never made themselves vulnerable to hearing. So it's gonna feel like a ambush almost if you just show up and start out questioning their perspective and pointing out their flaws, which is step 2. But we forget step 1 is getting perspective. And the fatal mistake is, I assume, especially when you give someone else advice unasked, that all the information I already have is the full perspective. So a lot of people skip that part.
Yeah.
When unasked advice occurs, then they just go to someone and say, listen, I saw you doing this, and
they assume they have the whole
you
picture.
should not be doing this because X, Y, Z, and they start just ambushing the person. Yeah, so assuming you have the full perspective is a fatal mistake, because then you come in guns blazing. So that's the best thing we would say that you should be aware of, the most important thing, because it's not a moment of vulnerability yet. So the way I approach this, and I've done this especially with someone like who's a family member, and you know that they don't take advice well, but you feel compelled as a person who loves them to point out this thing to them, because we might easily say that I would want someone to say this to me if I was blind to my own flaws. So I go to the person and I set the stage. I would say, listen, I have been noticing that your behavior in this sense has been XYZ, and you give them your perspective, but then you say, but I don't believe this to be true. You point out to them that this is only your perspective. I'm not sure if this is actually what it is. I wanted to know if you could just correct me, or point me in the right direction, or give me the information I require to really see this in the correct way. Obviously not as formal as I'm saying it now, but it is based on the person and what they're doing and how your relationship with them is. But then you just go to them and you point out to them, you want to have this conversation, but you don't immediately pretend like you know better than them about the situation. So that's very important. So you go in very willing to be wrong, and you give them the ability to deny this conversation to occur. They can say, why should I talk to you about this?
Seems like you're attempting to make it consensual.
You're attempting to make it consensual. You give them the ability to pull out or to engage. And if they engage and say, no, I'm more than, we can talk about this, I don't mind, then they have chosen to be vulnerable. And now if you then point stuff out, but again, don't point it out or say it in such a manner as if you know. Always say it in the words of, I saw this and I think this because of this, but probably not true because I know you're this way or that way. So you always kind of want to reinforce the fact that you're assuming yourself to be wrong, but you want to point this out to them because you care deeply for them. And that's your motivational style for saying why you are telling them these very offensive things about themselves. So that's how I would say that dynamic changes.
Yeah, okay. So the dynamic, so what you've given there is basically how your approach will change when giving non-consensual advice, which is to try and make the person accept that you want to tell them something confrontational or give them some advice about something, and then because they say no, sure, most people will say yes just because of the curiosity. It makes them more open to hearing what you have to say. I want to add something there, and this came from a book about negotiation. Very easy thing to tell someone directly in a non-confrontational way is to use language that is not, I saw you did. It's to use, it looks like, it seems like, or it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
And it softens the blow significantly. And you can use this in relationships, or you can use it at work. It seems like, or it sounded like you were very upset about what I just said. It seems like you don't like me right now. It completely puts the ball in their court to say, to refute the claim.
Yeah.
Not to say, you clearly don't like me. So it softens the blow of confrontation, is to just say, it sounded like, it looks like, and that was just to, it frames the accusation as a observer as opposed to an accuser. And that really helps the person clear their, or just reflect on.
But the way you say it as well, you can't just pretend like you're an observer, but say it in such a attacking method. And I've seen people do this. I've seen them say, no, you sound like such an idiot. You can't use that wording and then just bash them on the head.
No, it is true.
So yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a get out of jail free card. But do you it's interesting that you try to get consent, because most people don't do that. Most people say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I saw what you did there and it didn't look that good.
I think starting like that is very also dependent on the person. For me, I wouldn't mind that at all. I like having my flaws pointed out, and I inform my friends of this. Please, if you see something wrong in me, point it out to me, because I am a fool who cannot see his own mistakes. We all are a fool to our own mistakes. So if it's a person you know that can take it and is willing and open to take it, then yeah, that's perfectly fine. But if it's a person that's so hates seeing their own flaws or hates hearing that they have any imperfections, if you say that, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's a very different stage. You have to know who you're giving non-consensual advice to. It's a trick of the trade.
And then tailor it to them. Another question I have about this is quite interesting, is you need to identify the part of you that wants to give advice. why is it that when someone, let's say someone says something and it comes, maybe they said something completely wrong about some topic at a gathering, you feel like you need to go tell them why they're wrong? What part of you is doing that? Is it the part that wants to just let them know that you know the right answer? Is it the part of you that cares about them and doesn't want them to be wrong? And aren't you playing I want to say, a form of God by not allowing them to struggle and showing them the correct way? So you can see this perhaps at work, where someone is doing things a certain way and you've just taken it upon yourself to say, hey, but there's a better way to do this. I want to show you. What part of you is doing that? Or you're doing to make yourself feel better, like you are the type of person that will help everyone. And so identifying the part of you that is the initiator of that advice is very important.
It is incredibly.
You should not. Who says you should give that advice? Why are you interfering?
You point out the case for the necessity of being self-aware when you give advice, because you could be a built-in manipulator and you want to manipulate people, and if they don't get manipulated by you, you feel like they're not listening to your advice. But it ain't no advice, because you're trying to manipulate them without you knowing or being aware. So I have found the best way to give advice is always to do it out of I want the best for you, and I have so much love and respect for you, and I want you to prosper. And that's out of that mentality where all my advice comes from. But I've seen so many people find themselves in a situation and say, that person is such an unbelievably terrible person because they act in this way, and I just need to go and tell them how wrong they are so they can change the way. That is controlling. That is you want to control their bad behavior.
Control, yeah.
You want to control people. And I said this to my sister. It was yesterday. When approaching any of these situations, you must realize you must keep yourself clean. And it's not like, I'm so perfect, you're so bad type of thing. It's you know what you are in control of. You cannot pretend to be the objective observer of the situation. You can only be like, this is what I see, this is what you've told me, this is what I've observed, this is my take on things. And you don't put yourself in a situation where you want to control their actions. You're just there to point it out in a loving manner, and you allow them to take it or to not take it. And if you obviously think they really need this advice and they're like, no, I disagree with you, you must be able to be like, well, that's okay. I gave it to you. You had the freedom to choose what to do with that. And that's why I say you must keep yourself clean. Don't then try and force it upon them, because then all of a sudden you're stepping over the line of, it's not your side anymore. Now you're going into their side. So just make sure what is in your control, you are controlling correctly. And that's how you can guide yourself away from these bad advice situations.
Yeah, it's funny because, all of this is, it doesn't call for a reflection of self before the advice happens, and to take a step back and identify the state that you're in when you're trying to give the advice, because that changes the type of advice that you give. And the illusion of help. I always told people this when I taught for a bit, is that the way that you explain something is the way that makes you feel satisfied with your own explanation. It's ironic. So let me say that a bit better. An example of this, just looking at yourself, I saw when I was teaching, and I'd watch myself when I explain things to kids, and I'd see myself explaining things that a way that I wish I was explained to, or I wish to right now be explained in the way that I understand it. I don't take a step back and say, wow, what is their perspective and how can I explain it in a way that it works for them? I just want to explain it in a way that makes myself feel satisfied. So you mustn't teach in a way that makes yourself feel satisfied. You teach in an effective way. And that is just an observation of how we're so quick to make ourselves satisfied, and we think that we're helping other people. But yeah, it's a dangerous thing not to look within. when giving advice without.
Yeah.
A very bad poetic version, yes.
A good tip for people who struggle with that is to ask the person, what is it that they heard you say? So I've picked up over the countless examples of advice I've had to give.
Countless.
So many. That sounds so wrong. It sounds so boastful. But I am very grateful to have given advice so much. But I've learned the ability to not say what I want to say in the way I want to say it, but to say it in the way that they need to hear it. And that distinction is very important to giving advice. They might need to hear that they are wrong, but for you to just say you're wrong, it's maybe not the way they needed to hear it. They might have needed to be very softly informed that the way you see this is completely correct, but the way you've interpreted it, of how that other person's intentions were completely against you, don't you think that might be an assumption that you're making? And then they'll be like, okay, yeah, that is an assumption. And then you say, okay, but then you can't make that assumption. And then in that way, you've told them that they're wrong. So being able to tell someone something in the way they need to hear it is also essential in giving advice. But this is like asked all the types of advice. Just being able to be that good at communication. When I say that good, I just mean there's a skill required in communication, or communication is a skill required in giving advice, because it's not about what you want to tell them when giving advice. It's about what they need to hear. So I'll end with that.
I think we've explored consensual and non-consensual advice sufficiently now, all the potential errors and perhaps some of the things you should think about before you give advice, that just based on the issues that we've seen. You said you have a difficult question for me.
Yes. So to our viewers out there, let's watch Jordan struggle here. So I feel like I've been speaking quite a lot, and I thought, this could be quite a short podcast, so let's prepare questions for each other. A question on which Jordan can give me advice. So luckily, you don't have to fret. This is not something I actually need advice on, but it's a question I want to put you on the spot on, because I think a lot of people actually might have this situation. So that's going to make you not say anything dangerous, but
yeah,
we're all aware here that he's not telling you how to act. He's only going to help guide you in perspective on how to approach this situation. So here it is. How would I tell my parents I disagree with the way they raised me, specifically with the church I've been raised in? That I disagree with the way that, the church baptizes, or like all these kind of biblical teachings. You disagree with your parents' religion. You don't have to go to a different religion. You can if you want that example. You just maybe disagree with them within the religion. You want to be a different type of Christian. How would you? How must I go tell my parents this?
I'd first ask you, what do you want the outcome of your conversation to be?
I want them to accept my choice.
So you want them to accept you for who you are in your new belief, in your new worldview.
Yeah, I disagree with what they taught me, and they must not try and control me to.
Do they want them to support you, or do you want them to accept you?
I want them to support and accept me.
Do you think that's a fair request from your side?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's my own life, and I'm not meant to be indoctrinated. I wish to make my own choices and bear the consequences of them. And they are my parents, so I am entitled almost to get their support.
So you feel like as a parent you are obligated to support your kid in whatever decision they make?
Yes.
Even if you think it's wrong?
Yes.
I think I'd disagree with you there.
Okay, I can think of examples when that is wrong as well. But I think they might not have to support it, but, I'm 18, I'm out of school. They might not have to support it, but they cannot control me. So then maybe not. Then I won't expect their support, but I will still expect their accepting me, making a different decision.
What part of you needs their support and their acceptance?
I don't need it. I just want it.
Why?
Because it's
Do you
my
need
parents.
it to keep on believing?
I just don't want them to. I don't want to lose my relationship with them, and I need to go talk to them about this. And I think that's going to be the result.
What? Okay, so if you could choose between your relationship with them and they accept, I suppose that's the same thing. You'd assume that if they accepted you, that you maintain your relationship. But can that go together? Do you feel like you can have your parents' acceptance and support? Let me ask that another way around. I think you're assuming they all go together. In order to maintain the relationship, you need their support and you need their acceptance with your belief system.
If I go tell them now that I'm gonna change the church I'm going to, I fear that that's gonna make them cut me off. They won't accept my choice, and they'll stop loving me in some way. They won't stop speaking to me. I fear all these things. How should I go talk to them? What should I do? Should I just never tell them?
I think what's probably important with your parents so this is the part where I need to start actually giving advice, and this is usually the part that I struggle with. I would say from a manipulative perspective, your parents will respond more kindly to not what you want them to do, but how you feel about it. So if you want anyone to do anything for you, you need to know what it means to you, not telling them, I want you to do this. So an example of this, if you want your partner to greet you at the door, you express a lot of excitement about it, and if they do it in any small form, you reward it quite a lot. So you more start with, I really enjoy this and it means so much to me. So you try to put the emotions first and the desire behind what you want before you articulate what it is exactly that you want. So if I had to go to my parents now, and this is ironic because I had to do this with my parents to a certain degree, where I decided I wanted to figure out life for myself a bit, and my approach was, if I remember correctly, I want to do my own thing. I didn't actually have an approach. I was like, I want to do this, and these are the reasons I want to do it, and deal with it, type of thing.
So you closed the door, like?
No, I didn't close the door. I was fighting for the acceptance. What I wanted was okay, fine, I understand. A blessing. Like, I get where you are in this phase in your life, and acceptance. Go on your way. I disagree with you, but I accept your decision.
So you wanted their acceptance.
I think that not all parents will be equipped to do that.
But I don't know if my parents are those parents. How do I... What is your advice for me?
I think you need to ask some questions that imply that they're ready for that, which is, have conversations around what decisions are you accepting of me to have? If I do something wrong, what is your perspective? Do you allow me to make my own mistakes? If I do this, what would you think? To try and get a gauge on what is the allowance for your parents, letting you have your own life, and them supporting you from the sidelines and saying, listen, you're doing something wrong now, but I'm here for you when you need me. There's a certain element of control that they have to give to you, to allow you to do that. So you'd first have to gauge whether they are willing to do that first, because if they're not in that stage, or have not developed that absence of control, or within the Christian context, they haven't given that control over to God, then you're not going to get that. I personally feel you're not going to get acceptance.
So the reason I'm asking you is because I don't think that they are,
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to accept me. So what should I do?
I think you should, if it's if a big need for you, you should address the need as opposed to trying to convince your parents, because mostly I would say that question comes from wanting something from them, and you need to give that up first or explore that a lot more deeply before you try and fight for it with your parents, because most likely, even if you do get it from them, you're not going to find what you want. The desire for acceptance from a parent in the context of a worldview, I would say, comes from the fact that you really either value their opinion very deeply as parents, and you respect them and you want that from them, or you have some daddy or mommy issues where you need affirmation from your parents to accept a certain ideal, and that is something that is deep trauma from your childhood where you never got approval from them. This is something that is well explored that I know very little about. So I would say, where does your need come from, and are you truly going to get it from this? And if you're truly going to get it from this, what are you willing to give up for it? And are you looking in the right place for this desire? And based on what your parents are, the stage of life that they're in, what they've put in front of you, do you realistically expect them to do this? And if the answer to that is no, then you do have an unrealistic expectation, perhaps, of what your parents can give to you.
So I should not tell them?
I would say what I would do.
I was baiting you into that. You can
see why I struggle with these things, because I always get to an impasse when I give advice where it's like, what do you do? That I explore the situation so sufficiently that it's so difficult to decide what to do, because I brush off and show all the landmines in all directions.
Yeah.
But I'm very unwilling to tell the person that landmine is not as bad as that one. That's the part that I struggle with. But
I get you. All right. Well, that was well approached. You gave me perspective. I don't know what I'm going to do now, though.
See, that's the problem.
But thank you.
The problem is you leave and you're like, why did I go to Jordan?
So I'll remember for next time that you'll point out all the landmines, and I'll just feel even more confused. But see, that's
I was supposed to say, I'm here for you.
See, that's where our perspectives or our approaches differ, because I don't want to leave the person with
more confusion than
more confusion. But I get the hesitation you have with giving them a way out, saying, "Oh, that landmine is only going to take your foot, and that one will take your leg," because then
which one?
They'll blame you for losing their foot. So that is it for today, guys. I hope you are going to have a good chat with your parents if you need one. But so yes, please always be self-aware and be aware of why you're giving advice and what type of person you're giving advice to, and hopefully we have assisted you in how to approach giving advice. Or perhaps we've left them more confused than they came. Well, you know where to find me. I'll give you some more advice. Thanks, guys. Cheers.